as you can see, we're going to be sharing the speakers, so we will be talking loud, but if anyone can't hear, then do ask us to talk a bit louder. So I'm going to start off by just going along the panel and asking you to introduce yourself and to describe your most recent genre work and say, of those three genres, if there's one that is your preferred, basically. So if we start with you, Rex.
Hi, yeah, I'm Rex Burke. I am the sci-fi writer, I think, on this panel. I write, I think, what you would call cosy, feel-good sci-fi. You should have a good time. I can't think of them as entertainments. No one dies horribly, or if they do, it's funny. My most recent book is called Third Lock from the Sun, and it's set on a dreamy Scottish island. It's sci-fi mystery with kind of local hero vibes. So that's me.
Sounds great. Jennings, how about you?
I'm Jennings, Zabrinsky. I'm a fantasy writer, I guess. In my stories, lots of people die horribly. It's very, I tend to write very action-oriented stuff. A lot of sword fights and shootouts and that sort of thing. It's all kind of a bit schlocky and pulpy in that way. That's me, basically.
Sounds great. And last but not least, Steve.
Good morning. I'm Steve Russell. I'm the author of Steen. I'm the horror element of this particular panel. Steen is the most recent publication of mine, so horror is really in my wheelhouse. It's one of my favorite genres. I love fantasy and sci-fi, but there's always just been something about horror that brings me back to it. Honestly, he's got his claws in me.
Fantastic. So let's start by hearing a little bit from each of your novels. Should we start with you, Steve?
Sure. So just a little context real quick before I go into the reading. They're about to do a demon summoning in this. This is a demonic thriller set in Greater London and London itself. They found a location in order to do a summoning. There is actually a lot of research put into this from a demonology standpoint. I won't read the Satanic Prayer. We'll be okay. I know. So the main character is a dude called Steen. He's a Canuck, a Canadian. I'm not Canadian, just incidentally. And he does have here on his shoulder, if you can see him, a little capuchin monkey. That is an angel in the form of a capuchin. Okay? His name is Raph. Raph shot around him, lighting candles and getting everything in order as Steen prepared the summoning circle, taking extra time to ensure the sigil was perfect. They quickly moved through the building, settling on an empty workspace with the most amount of room to prepare in, and it got straight to work. Satisfied with the marking, he took out a bag of salt from the gym bag and tore it open, ignoring what spilled to the floor. Moving slowly, he traced out a salt circle around the summoning symbol, thick enough that an errant gust wouldn't be enough to blow the salt apart. It was dark inside the building, though the candles illuminated it with an eerie flicker. Judging by the graffiti and empty beer cans that littered the floor, people had clearly been here, but its halls were silent now, bar the disturbance they were causing. Dilapidated and forgotten, the place looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The odd desk or chair had been left behind when the initial exodus took place, now overgrown with mold and dust. As soon as he discovered the warehouse on an urban exploring site, Steen knew it would make an ideal place to invite a king of hell. A perfect place for a banishment back below, but an awful place to die. He shook the unwanted idea from his mind and refocused on the task at hand. Complete the circle, make sure it's thick, trustworthy. His heart was beating faster as the time drew near, and he felt resentment at having to put his trust in these elements to keep him safe. He hated putting his faith in anything, especially given his lackluster relationship with Lady Luck. Almost done? Raph had organized the Satanic Prayer for Steen, ready and raring to go. He stole a glance at his capuchin partner as he completed another loop of the circle, emptying the last remnants of salt onto the ground. Now all we need is some fries and we're good to go. Steen quipped, his tone dark and heavy. Don't worry, we've done our homework and haven't skimped on the details. We hold the cards right now. Yeah, right now. How's that going to work out later? It'll be fine. You've done this before. Remember, I'll be keeping an eye out, patrolling the room, checking windows, making sure we're not disturbed. You just focus on the incantation, and don't let him get into your head. Not much there, really, even if he does. I'm serious. The salt will be enough to keep him at bay and to nullify his greater powers, but Vine is still cunning and, without a doubt, the trickiest of all demons, save Satan. He'll be doing all he can to twist and distort your purpose until it serves him, just like he did with his victims. I'm fine. That's not funny. I know. He shared a weak smile as Steen returned his attention to the sheet of paper he'd drawn Vine's sigil on. He kept it safe inside a binder to keep it pure, undamaged. Little things like that would have had an adverse effect on even beginning to summon this asshole. Steen looked around, taking a moment to center himself like he'd been taught. His breathing was choppy, and he was aware of an unwanted tingling in his fingers. So he focused on inhaling and exhaling as Raph finished lighting the last of the black candles. Once done, he lit the incense, which burned quickly, releasing a heady aroma into the air, accompanied by a significant amount of heavy smoke. Steen's head began swimming as he tried to make sense of his thoughts, to cut through the smog and find himself once more. Everything's in order, Steen. Candles and incense are prepared, the circle is complete and secure. You have the sigil and prayer. The rest is up to you.
Thank you. Can I just ask about the monkey? Does the monkey talk like psychically, or does the monkey talk? Oh.
Well, here's the thing, right? Out and about, he can talk. Doesn't want to give the game away that he's an angel. So the pretense is he's a therapy capuchin. That's how they get out and about around London.
Awesome. Shall we hear a bit from you, Jennings?
Yeah, sure. So I'm just going to start at the start of the book because every other scene that I liked had a bunch of like gibberish terms that you won't know if you haven't read from the start. Copper squinted, shielding his dry eyes from the glare of the baking sun. His feet ached, his throat was dry, his back was wet, and his wrists stung like hell. The rope binding them cut deeper into his tender flesh with every jerk. It felt like he'd been walking for a day and hadn't had a drink in almost as long. He blinked and focused on the silhouette of the tall, feathered creature sat upon the saddle of a flagging strider, his strider. Long neck wilting like a dead flower, stilt legs, taking one exhausted step after another. The bag of fleas and matted fur looked as parched as he felt. He planted his feet, the rope pulled tight. He winced as fresh agony burnt into his wrists. The feathered creature let out an annoyed squawk as the strider stopped in its tracks. Sergeant Fletcher turned in the saddle to fix Copper with a yellow-eyed glare, the bright blue feathers on his head standing to attention. The birdman's beak vibrated as he let out a rapid series of clicks. "Do that again," Fletcher said, his voice a high-pitched half squawk, "and you'll regret it." I'm not going to do the voice. Copper licked his dry lips, tried to swallow, and coughed instead. "Water." The word tore his desiccated throat as if it were made from rusty iron. "Please, water." Fletcher shook himself, the feathers along his shoulders, an arm standing there to attention. "Shut up," Fletcher said. He mangled the last P, hard to say without lips. "You had some an hour ago." "Had it really only been an hour?" Fletcher turned away and used his clawed feet to spur the strider into a trot. Copper was jerked painfully forward again. He stumbled on in the creature's dusty wake, cursing Fletcher and the rest of the mutinous cretins he'd marched out into this blasted place with. There was a stone in his right boot, periodically stabbing him in the arch of his foot, and the leather of his left boot was wearing thin, the baked dirt hard as rock beneath it. How had it come to this? Stupid question. This was what happened when you failed to earn a payday for your men 3 times in a row. It had been a long shot. Better mercenaries hadn't managed to catch the elusive bandits responsible for disappearing so many lumber caravans. After weeks of marching around the crags in circles without seeing so much as a spent campfire, the men had finally concluded that they'd have to survive another month on empty pockets. They'd also concluded they should make it certain their captain wouldn't fail them a 4th time.
So we're jumping right into the action there.
Yeah.
So could you tell us just a little bit, could you give us a bit of context of that?
Copper is he's kind of leading a band of like mercenaries in a sort of Wild Westy frontier sort of environment.
Mm-hmm.
And he is, things haven't been going well.
Mm-hmm.
They failed several jobs in a row, and now his men have turned on him and decided that maybe someone else should be in charge, and maybe he should be tied up and delivered to their employers.
Oh, okay, brilliant. Okay. And finally, could we get a little extract from your novel, Rex?
Of course, yeah. All right, the sci-fi books I've written so far all really are about young, clueless people thrust into alien environments. And, you know, you could say that's autobiographical, I'm sure that's feeding through. The clueless individual in Third Lock from the Sun is Jake. He's English, a student from London. He's thrust into a particular alien environment, Scotland. He's come up for a job that doesn't appear to exist, a summer job that doesn't appear to exist. He's been given a lift to the place he's staying by a quite hostile young woman. He's told to come back in the evening to meet her father, who apparently has a job for him, but doesn't have a job for him. He's not quite sure what's going on. So we're going to meet Jake in Scotland. By the time he reached the Port Hotel, it was after 7. There was music coming from inside the bar. Live music by the sound of it. You could hear furious fiddling, a couple of dueling guitars, and a strong voice with a determined edge to it. It was empty inside, apart from a folk band hammering away in one corner. The voice belonging to a thick-set man with a shaved head who was lost in the song, fists clenched as he belted out the lyrics. Something about the lost fleet of Spain and a wreck that caused pain, and then, if Jake had understood correctly, a lengthy account of the many and varied ways that pernicious Albion was to blame for everything. Jake stood at the bar and looked around as the band continued to play. Musicians aside, he was the only person there. He leaned over to look behind the bar but couldn't see anyone. The song the band had been playing morphed into another without a break. And Jake looked back at the room, resting one arm on the counter. It seemed rude to walk out again and a bit weird to go and sit at one of the tables in an otherwise empty bar, but the band showed no sign of stopping. There was no evidence of any bar staff. One of the fiddle players looked up and Jake caught his eye and nodded. The other fiddle player took over and Jake tapped his fingers a few times on the counter in time with the beat. Slowly, the tune disintegrated as the fiddle ground to a halt, followed by the twin guitars, and finally, reluctantly, the singer, who stopped mid-chorus, mid-word even, as the music faded behind him. The singer turned to look at the band, some of whom shrugged. He walked slowly towards the bar, wordlessly, laser eyes fixed on Jake, lifted up a hinged counter, walked through and stood behind the bar. Quite big, Jake now realised, the singer. Big and intense, solidly built, like a giant potato with Jack Nicholson eyes. Looming was probably a better word for what he was doing behind the bar. Definitely not just standing, rearing, towering, something like that. He said to Jake deliberately, stretching the word out to half a dozen syllables. God, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for you to, I wasn't. The man continued to stand there impassively. Right, sorry, I'll have a lager then, please. You won't, not in this pub. What? Lager, we don't have it, do we, lads? Terrible sudden drink. There was a murmur of assent from the band. God, it's like every bar scene from every bad horror movie. And how was lager wrong? It wasn't like he'd asked for an apple teeny. A beer then? English? What? Jake badly wanted this exchange to be over, didn't even want the drink, but couldn't see any way to back out now. And yet here he was, about to apologise again for something beyond his control. Stupid parents with an inconsiderate nationality. English or Scottish, said the man. The beer. He pointed at the row of beer pumps. And then up at a blackboard, behind the bar, where ales were divided into two lists, foreign beer and proper beer. Top of the foreign beer list was a light Cornish ale called Little Whittle. The badge on the tap had a picture of a urinating child. There was no way Jake was ordering that. What do you recommend, he asked, playing for time, but the man was already pulling on a pump further down the bar, filling a glass with something dark and forbidding. Jake sneaked to look at the brand badge and the blackboard. The beer was called Highland Berserker. The tasting notes just said, good luck. The guy put it on the counter, looked Jake squarely in the eyes, he reached for his wallet and said, pay later. You sure? Aye, son, don't worry. You can't exactly hide on the island. You can try. There was a laugh from someone in the band, and the bartender made his way back as the music started up again. He picked up the chorus faultlessly, and Jake took his drink to a table, crippled with embarrassment. 5 minutes later, the band called it a day, and from the back and forth, Jake realised it interrupted a warm-up session for later that night. 10 minutes after that, the bar started to fill. The folk band singer, now firmly ensconced behind the counter, dispensing drinks with an air somewhere between bonhomie and suppressed rage. Duncan appeared at Jake's shoulder. "What's that? The berserker?" he said. "Good man, you're a brave one. I didn't get much of a choice." "Ah, you've met Jimmy then. Gives it to everyone their first time in. Reckons it's a test of character." "What happens if you don't like it or want it?" Jake was interested to know, because his own tasting notes at this point were, "Jesus, mud? Christ on a bike." Fraser looked puzzled. "No idea, no one's ever complained. I mean, you don't want to fall out with the landlord on a tiny island with just the one pub." "He's the landlord? I thought he was in the band." "Among other things, Jimmy McPherson, licensee, taxi driver, undertaker." There's a taxi. Jake couldn't picture it an island this size. He didn't even want to know about the other thing. It was his Land Rover, the one I got a lift in. I wouldn't let Jimmy hear you say that'll be on your bill. Right, shall we eat?
So, is there one horror, fantasy, or sci-fi author that you really love and that you'd recommend to the audience? Any of you?
I would recommend Joe Abercrombie
Mm-hmm.
because he's very good at prose and his books have a very like cinematic feel to them, where you're very close to the characters and it's, the narrative is very like filtered through the lens of the character you're seeing things through. It's very good, like kind of example in how to use like colour the perspective of the writing, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's an example of a book by Joe Abercrombie?
My favourite one is Best Served Cold. It's kind of like a it's kind of like an Ocean's 11 type kind of deal, where they've got like the cast of like hyper competent characters, but in like a fantasy setting. So you've got like the best burglar in the world and the best fighter or whatever, and they all go on sort of capers. Instead of robbing banks, they've got like a list of people they're trying to assassinate, basically. Sort of revenge thing. It's kind of like Kill Bill actually as well.
Oh, sounds great. Yeah. What about you, Steve?
I mean, when it comes to horror, the low-hanging fruit is Stephen King. Obviously, he is a king of the genre for a reason, and he's so prolific over so many years. But I think it kind of comes into what kind of horror you want, just like what kind of sci-fi or fantasy you feel. Like, do you want something that's sort of more visceral, something that's more psychological, something that's more gory? I've been reading, recently I read something called The Only Good Indians, or something like that, by Stephen Graham Jones. That was really good. He used a lot of Native American mythology in there, with shape-shifting and how they inhabit animals. That was very cool, so a little bit of body horror in that. And there's also, I can't remember the name of the author off the top of my head, but there's one called The Final Girl Support Group. That was really meta. That was a lot of fun. So if you guys like horror movies, you might be familiar with the trope of the final girl, the surviving individual at the end, who tends to be female. And it's a support group for final girls who have survived different encounters with different like monsters, like psychos, serial killers, whoever it is, and they all come together to discuss their experiences. And it's a pretty cool book. The Final Girl Support Group, I'd recommend checking it out. The author's name escapes me right now, though, unfortunately. But yeah, it's not as easy as saying this is the de facto one. It kind of how I'm feeling, what kind of horror I want to engage with. You know?
Absolutely. How about you, Rex?
Yeah, I think that's similar probably for all genres really. I mean, I grew up reading all the classic sci-fi and then worked my way through Stephen Baxter and Greg Bear and all those kind of people, and you know, that's what I've read historically. I've started reading a lot more indie sci-fi since I've been writing my own. Seems like a setup, it's not. It's absolutely true that my favourite indie sci-fi read of the year, the guy who wrote it's in at the back there. It's called Icebreaker. Stephen William Hanna. It's extraordinary. It's set in a post-apocalyptic, psychedelic, shamanic Scotland, and it's described as Das Boot meets what was Bird Box. Das Boot meets Bird Box. It's brilliant, and this is why I no longer I don't like to pigeonhole trad sci-fi against indie sci-fi. The great book is a great book, and that genuinely is a great book. If you're looking for something from a trad author, then the Booker Prize winner, Orbital, is extraordinary. Is it sci-fi? I don't know. It's certainly sciencey, and it's an amazing book, and it's really, you know, it's 100 20 pages or whatever it is, yeah. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. So, what drew you into these genres? Was it something when you were kids? Were there particular TV shows or films that you might have watched when you were kids?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
You go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I've actually made a living from writing my whole career, really, but not as a sci-fi writer. It's a huge departure for me. And it's not really a spoiler to say that Rex Burke isn't actually my name either. It's a pen name. I was a travel writer for a long time. Jules Brown, I used to write for Rough Guide. So the first book I ever got published was a Rough Guide to Scandinavia. And I did that for an awful long time. And then I picked up the sci-fi in lockdown, and I always thought I could write a sci-fi book. But I think actually I probably need to go further back than that. I bought the first book I ever wrote with me. And so Jules Brown isn't actually my name at all. It's Julian Brown is what I was christened. So I think this probably explains why the sci-fi. So I wrote this when I was 9. Called Space by Julian Brown. I priced it a very competitive 27.5p. I didn't think it through because I only wrote the one copy, and I still own it. So I didn't make any money out of this one at all. But clearly, the space sci-fi thing has always been there.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. What about you, Jennings?
Yeah, I think likewise. I can't really remember not being into fantasy and sci-fi really. I think it goes back to like just the media I was exposed to as a kid. I think I probably watched Star Wars when I was like 3, and then so there was never really a concept of like, oh, there's fiction that isn't completely made up, and then there is like this other type of thing that's like fantasy and sci-fi. I was kind of just all one thing. And yeah. I do still like occasionally read like contemporary stuff, but mostly I do enjoy fantasy and the lack of kind of real world restrictions. You know, you can still have important stakes and themes and that sort of thing without being having to be grounded in like a familiar environment. And you could there's the highbrow argument of like, oh, you know, you can. There's more like purity of exploring things, but also like it's kind of just fun if there's more fun if there's like a dragon and a wizard. Like, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And how about you, Steve?
It's all my mom's fault. I was like 9 or 10, and I was sick from school, and for some reason they were showing a version of the original Night of the Living Dead on TV, and she didn't leave me alone to watch it. It wasn't like, just watch what you want and I'll check on you. It was just, she watched it with me, and it messed me up in the best way. And it's still stuck with me all this time later. Like, that movie is a seminal flick within the horror genre. And there's just this one scene, for those who might have seen it, where it's like, it cuts outside where they're trapped in the house, and the zombies are feasting on some of the people outside who've already been felled. And that ingrained itself into my psyche. As a little 9-10-year-old Steve, man, and I didn't stand a chance. So I blame my mom for that.
Oh, amazing. So I don't know if any of our audience are writers. No?
Yeah.
Yeah?
If he's not, that's incredible.
So I was just going to ask, like, for people that are maybe wanting to get into writing, what are some ways to break into genre writing? Would you recommend starting with short stories and trying to send those out to get published, or would you recommend writing a book and publishing it yourself, or approaching publishers? We start with Steve.
So I did exactly that as a means to sort of test KDP back in the day during lockdown, like how Rex was saying, how you reconnect with the sci-fi at that point. Because my background is in screenwriting, and I'd always been really interested in writing long form after a trip out to the States to support a short movie I did. And I wrote a lockdown horror short story called I Must Scream on Deaf Ears, which was my way of processing a lot of the stuff that was going on. It was heavily influenced by a movie called Host, if anybody's familiar with that. It's a short horror movie that was done. It was a demonic seance that people held in quarantine from different houses, but within that Zoom meeting, the parameters were it had to begin and end within, was it 40 minutes for a Zoom call? Yeah. So the entire narrative had to take place within that. It was all through their computer screens. Wonderful little flick. But that I watched that, I was like, I don't have an excuse here. If they can make this creatively during this kind of time period, what's my excuse? Let me work out how I'm feeling about this. Let me process this through my horror and get to grips with that. So that was the first thing I did, and then eventually it flipped to my first book, which is a superhero movie, which is the closest to sci-fi I've got, if you loosely sci-fi with the superhero stuff, and then onto the demonic thrillers with Steam. But I tried the trad route, you know, that route, and obviously there's pros and cons to both. Me, I grew up listening to punk rock music. I don't really like a lot of gatekeepers, and I don't like being told no a lot of times. And there's a lot of rejection when it comes to traditional publishing. You have to develop a thick skin for that if that's something that you want to pursue. It is a natural part of it. And eventually it got to a point of like, I feel confident enough in my work and not in a sort of like surface level way of like, that's good, out. I really, you know, you really have to hone and be your own biggest critic to make sure that it's in a confident state to then pursue publication, because it's representative of you. And if you really love your work, you should never want to put out something that is just okay, right? Good enough isn't good enough, right? But perfect is the enemy of done. And this is the thing that we all have to balance here. But I love my journey with self-publishing so far. I've loved it, and I would say, like, if you really, really wanted an aid to go the agent and then the trad route, by all means, go ahead. You know, I'm not stopping you. You know, do what you want, right? But like, if at a certain point you have a story that all you want to do is share it with the world and have it connect with people, there are means for you to be able to do that without, you know, those people constantly saying no on such a, I'm wrapping up, I promise, on such a sort of like subjective subject. On any given day, somebody might wake up and the agent might love it, but something might have happened where they don't love it. So instead of doing that, just put it out to the readers and they can make up their own mind about it subjectively too. I'm done, sorry.
What about you, Rex?
It depends what the question is, really, to unpack it a bit. I mean, if you want to know how to write a book, you sit down and write a book. There's no way around it. You know, that's the world is full of people who want to write a book and never get beyond the first page or the first chapter. It's a job like anything else. I chose self-publishing for all sorts of reasons, really. I've been traditionally published for a long time with my travel stuff. I know that if I queried the books with an agent, I mean, those books have been out, I've put out 5 books in 2 years. I wouldn't have 1 book out in the world if I'd gone the trad route. Yeah, maybe down the line, I sell an awful lot of copies the trad route. This way, I sold copies from day one, and I'm really kind of happy with the way that's going. So.
Brilliant, okay, yeah. Because that's one thing that a lot of authors have said to us, that it takes about 2 years before the book's published traditionally. So quite a long time frame if you're impatient, I think, basically.
If I may, I mean, that's discounting the potential 8 to 12 just to hear back from an agent.
Yeah.
You know, as well. It's a long game, that game, and as Rex has rightly pointed out, like, you can release so many things that you're proud of in that type of equivalent time period, and establish an audience base and get to know your readership.
Do you have anything to add on that?
No, these guys pretty much covered this.
Okay, brilliant, awesome. Does anyone in the audience have any questions?
Can I just say something that struck me? I've come because it's the last day and I want to go through, experience everything. Not particularly that I follow your subject matter, but I listened to the radio all night, and I listened to them interviewing a woman from Africa who experienced, may touch on what you said, she experienced visitations from spirits who'd passed and this sort of thing, haunted houses, etc. And this is very common, and then the exorcism of children in Africa and so on. She experienced all these things and had a very difficult life. When she was about 50, having been forced to become a lawyer by her father, dominant and violent father, she had always written, and she then went and did a course in writing horror. And she looked into the subject of horror, and she found that there was no horror genre in Africa. So she decided to go down that route. She read a horror story. Couldn't get a publisher to publish it, so she self-published and sold brilliantly, and she's now been awarded all sorts of things. She's got her own company and everything. She's very big. But there's a lot of horror going on in Africa in their real lives, if you like. and I just thought it's interesting. It touches upon you, and you hinted that you experienced something as a child. Did any of you feel that there were horrors going on in the world that touched you in your lives when you were young?
When I was young, probably, yeah. But I can't remember what those specifically would have been. But, you know, we had the news as kids, and you could see that there was like wars going on. I mean, I grew up in when it was like the invasion of Iraq and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, as a child, that does, like, you know, you do take that in. You can't really ignore that sort of thing. But I don't have any like specific personal experiences that influenced me that way.
My family, my mom and my gran have both claimed to have spectral encounters. I have not had any myself. But what I will say is whilst I was doing preliminary research for STEAM, and there was a lot of research and a lot of dark stuff I had to look up and read and get to grips with, because I was raised in the faith. I was raised Christian. I don't believe now. I've not been a part of that for a long time, and it's not a denigration on those who do believe or anything like that. The religious backdrop to what Steen has is just that, is a backdrop to then explore the story and its characters. But some of the things I was encountering, some of the things I was reading, especially when you're alone in your apartment, and it's like the dead of night and you're reading by yourself how to summon a demon.
Imagination.
There's something, you feel something behind you.
Has anyone else got any other questions?
I was just wondering, and I'll call you Rex.
I've known John for a long time.
I was concentrating very hard not to call you by your name before anybody allowed it. Where are we then with the bunch of kids, the planets, the other civilization? Come on, you left that one.
I know. John, I wrote, the first books I wrote was a trilogy, Odyssey Earth trilogy, starting with Orphan Planet. It's a satisfying, complete story arc. The story ends and everything's happy ever after, I think. But there are some loose ends there that I left in case I wanted to go further into that world. That's what John's alluding to, and I will do, and yes, that's going to happen. But I wrote the trilogy, and like a lot of writers, I'd lived with those characters then for a couple of years, and I've kind of had enough of that. I want to do something else. So the last 2 books I've written and the one I'm doing now have all been standalones, very different subjects. You know, this one on a Scottish island. The last one was The Wrong Stops, based on an interrail journey that students are making around Europe, and they meet a mysterious stranger. So I will come back to that world at some point, yes. And then, you know, that's the series I would probably continue. So I'm sort of mixing it up. Thank you, Jill. Not a great answer.
No, but
Apologies if I've missed this, because I was going to the other event. I've been flitting a bit. I need to be a bit braver in my film choices, but I'm a massive wuss, and I'm the same, that when I'm watching something alone, my imagination gets a bit carried away. Have you got any almost like gateway horror films that you could recommend?
I mean, what are you interested in? Like psychological body horror, zombie stuff?
Well, I really enjoyed The Substance. So,
Substance?
yeah.
Okay, that was... so something like The Substance, I watched that recently, so that's really body horror, and, you know, especially with how we approach aging and how we engage with that. Have you watched The Fly?
Not in years. But
Okay, I would probably revisit that with Goldblum. That's like an apex sort of body horror flick there. That's probably my go-to. Let me make a little list. I'm here all day. I'll come back to you later with some other recommendations for you.
Look forward to it.
Like when it comes to writing and especially editing and everything, what's the process? Because obviously, if you guys are self-publishing, you don't have the big leagues behind you to back it up.
Basically do lots of revisions. I mean, you're self-publishing, you can still hire an editor, but a lot of us don't have the budget for that, because editors charge per word. You can get a long way by doing lots of your own revisions, doing lots of revising it in different formats. Like you'll read the book differently if it's in paper and if it's on Kindle versus if it's just in like a Word document, and that does help catch a lot of things. Also, like reading it out loud, because some things you can write, but if you say it, then you'll be like, that sentence is way too long because I ran out of breath. But I read all the way through. And then also having like beta readers to give feedback. Ideally, people that you're not related to or like very close friends with outside of writing, because you do need like honest feedback, which it can you need to strike a balance with not necessarily taking everything they say to heart, because you might get conflicting opinions, and if you go with like the last thing you heard, you'll end up stuck in a cycle forever. So you do need to stick to your guns sometimes, but if you have like 6 people reading it and 4 of them say the same thing, then it's probably like, maybe give that some serious thought as to whether there is like a problem you need to address.
Can I ask about your cover art, all 3 of you, because they look great, and for self-published books they're just really great covers, I think. Did you get them done by someone, or did you just get them off the internet?
So mine, I entered a contest on the internet where they had like 100 covers, and it was like the goal was to write a book based on the cover, including the title and the pen name, and then and then publish it, and that was all part of the thing. So that's where I got mine, and then but as part of that, I kind of learned how to make a cheap cover, because I talked to the people that ran the contest, and you can get by with get quite a long way with stock art and a nice font, because that's all that is. And the prequel is one I made myself in a similar style, and I think it looks pretty comparable. And it total probably costs like less than 15 quid, because you basically just go through. There's loads of royalty. They won't necessarily be royalty free, but like images that are already drawn that you can pay a little bit of money for to get a license. And as long as it's not been used in something very famous, people aren't going to necessarily spot it and be like, that's stock art. Sometimes they do, because sometimes you'll see a fantasy cover, and you'll go, I've seen that on an album on Spotify. But if you're careful, you can get by quite cheaply.
Yeah, cool. What about yours, Rex?
Well, this one I made myself. Really going back to also what Jennings was saying about the editing and everything else. Covers is really the only thing I spend money on. From the outset, I didn't want there to be any barrier to someone picking up my book, and one of the big barriers from indie publishing is the covers look homemade. So for me, that was really important. So I have a cover designer, I have branding, I make sure that the trilogy all looks the same, that the standalones kind of look like they come from the same universe. So that's what I spend my money on. I'm fortunate, in that I can do that, and also being that in previous life I was a editor and proofreader as well as a writer, so I do a lot of the heavy lifting there that otherwise I might farm out. I have spent money on proofreading before now, but mostly the process is exactly the same as Jennings was describing. I have an alpha team, which is my wife. She's the first person who reads the finished book. And then I have a very small beta team, 4 or 5 people who I've met over the years on social media, and they kind of run through exactly the process Jennings was talking about. But the covers to me were the one thing. I don't want anybody looking at my book on Amazon to be able to pick it out from a Tradpub book, because that's an immediate put off for some people. So.
That's an actual exercise you should do, by the way, is get like the Amazon page and then Photoshop your cover into the catalogue.
At thumbnail size.
Yeah.
Because there's no point having this amazing cover that someone's worked on like this, and that when you get it down to that size, you can't actually see what's going on. So these are all really good points.
What about you, Steve? Anything to add?
I mean, these guys pretty much nailed it. So my cover was done by a guy called Tim Barber. He's a really nice dude because he is very patient with me, and we went through a lot of iterations of this to get it to where it was. even if it's just like, can you please move this down just a little bit? Okay, Steve, thank you, it looks perfect now. You know, things like that. But like, when it comes to genre fiction, horror in particular, you need to be able to express the idea immediately. People say don't judge books by the cover, we all do. Of course, let's not lie to each other here. But this, with the pentacle and stuff like that, it gives the immediate, you got London, you got the dude with the monkey on his shoulder. It gets a lot across visually very quickly. And if you are interested in horror, this should hopefully capture your attention long enough to make you want to read the back and know a little bit more. My process, I do go through quite a lot of iterations of editing before I'm happy to send it to my editor. I always like to get it as near perfect. My partner's made fun of me in the past where she says, like, you're paying this guy to edit for you. Why are you editing it so much yourself to get it to a state of, you know, perceived perfection where you want him to give it back to you and be like, no nuts, what am I paying for? You know? Obviously something will come through. Things will always slip through the gates and or past the goalie, if you will. I mean, even in trad published books, I was reading Children of Hurin last year. There are typos in that. That's Tolkien. You know, like, it happens. So I wouldn't get so hung up on that. And what I've heard is within the indie space, your readers very helpfully point out sometimes when there are typos. And because you are in control of your manuscript, you can make the amendments, boom, re-upload it. You're all good. And then suddenly you thank them. They've contributed to help you be part of the process. And you know, you'll feed into each other to make the book and the story as good as possible. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I think we've got to the end of our slot now, so thanks very much to all three of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve, Jennings, and Rex. Give them a round of applause. And you're going to hang around for a bit and chat to people and sell books if you're interested. So our next writer talk is going to be at 12:30, and that's Tom Huddleston, who'll be talking about the Wolves of June, but also about the worlds of George R.R. Martin. I forgot his name